All right. Welcome, everybody. Sorry, we're trying to get this is. I don't do presentations with audio in them because I know that it's never going to work on the day. And this is like the one presentation that has audio input. And I didn't come prepared to make sure that we could have audio because I found out about this presentation 3 hours ago. So there's going to be one section where we won't get to have a bit of a demo, but I can send the YouTube link to you afterwards. Welcome, everyone. Anybody who was expecting, I think the previous talk was meant to be about WebAssembly. Now, anybody who thinks this talk is still about WebAssembly, and you're in for accessibility instead. You know, close, the words are a little bit similar. Hi, my name's Amy. I have travelled from Australia for Oslo, for NDC Oslo this week, as the response that we've gotten to give every time we tell people we're from Australia. Yes, I did come all this way. I am here in person. That's how I managed to make it. I came all of this way. And today I want to talk to you about accessibility. Now, the world that we live in today relies more and more on technology for us to go about our everyday lives. We as creators of these technologies therefore have an important responsibility to ensure that we're not excluding those around us who want to use what it is that we're creating. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. This is a quote by Tim Berners-Lee, who I generally refer to as the inventor of the internet. I know he didn't, but if anybody could be credited with inventing the internet, that's Tim Berners-Lee. I just want to add a disclaimer because normally people get very upset and explain to me that Tim Berners-Lee did not invent the internet. I'm aware. But what it does mean is that he knows a lot about the web and the internet. So what does it mean to make things accessible, and what does it mean for us? It means that when we create technologies, whether they're software, hardware, or something else that we haven't thought of yet, it means that anybody can use and interact with it, using whatever means that they prefer and given whatever capabilities they have. It means the internet, the technologies and the solutions that we are creating are made for everyone and with everyone in mind. How is that actually relevant to us though? And why is it so important? For better or worse, the people who design the touch points of society determine who can participate and who is left out, often unwittingly. This is a quote by Kat Holmes from Mismatch: How Inclusion Shapes Design. All of us in this room today are in a very important position. We're in one that can make a difference to people around us. We have the power to make things better for people. We can decide who is able to participate and who is left out. We can make a difference in these people's lives. But let's just for a second ignore that inclusion is a good thing and excluding people is bad. What else does accessibility and inclusion do for us? A study in 2018, or we might actually be getting sound. A study in 2018 by the Disability Council for Australia found that inclusive teams and workplaces are 10 times more likely to be highly effective, 9 times more likely to innovate. They're 4 times more likely to provide an excellent customer experience, they're 4 times more likely to stay at a company, and they're 19 times more satisfied with their jobs. This feels like a win for us, like inclusion feels like a good thing. But on top of that, accessibility is a basic human right. We're starting to see drastic changes to legislation and regulations around accessibility and inclusion. And countries all over are ensuring that their laws are being kept up to date with technology as it becomes more intermingled with our day-to-day lives. So it's no longer a case of if, but when we're going to be legally required to make sure what we're building is accessible. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret about this, is that it's easier to do it now. It's easier to make the changes and improvements now as we build things, as we go. To include it from the very beginning is great, rather than trying to stick a band-aid on it later. But to include it now, as we go, is much better than finding out that actually there's a regulation that's changed and we need to do it yesterday. Now, how many of you in the room know if what you're currently building is accessible? A few? How many know that what you're currently building is inaccessible? Do you know if it's something you're working towards? Do you know if it's something that you're talking about? Every inaccessible web page tells people with an impairment you aren't welcome in this world. If you don't know whether your website or your app is accessible, it's not. It's time to start learning. This is a quote by Loren Legasic, who is an accessibility engineer based in Australia, who is having a little bit of a rant on Twitter because her dad is blind and can't function most of his life because our society is inaccessible. If you don't know if you're doing it right, there's a decent chance you're probably not. But it's not too late to make the change, to start making improvements, and to make sure that everyone using your product feels welcome. So, who are we making feel welcome? Who benefits from accessibility? When we think of accessibility, we generally think of people with permanent impairments. This could be someone who is blind or deaf, or someone who is in a wheelchair or missing the use of a limb. The World Bank estimates that these people with permanent impairments, are at least 15% of the global population. That's over 1.2 billion people. These are just people with permanent impairments, which are a small subset of people who benefit from accessibility. Impairments are split into 3 categories: permanent, temporary, and situational. Permanent impairments are not likely to be resolved. These are long-term, like a missing or non-functioning limb. We then have temporary impairments, which can't be resolved quickly, but will likely resolve in the short to long term. For example, a broken arm. And finally, we have situational impairments, which are the result of the environment alone and can be resolved by leaving it. For example, holding a small child or a pet. All 3 examples involve limited or no access to a limb, but all have different impact on a person's life. Although not all impairments are permanent and they may not have as great an impact on people's lives, they can all be made easier by accessibility improvements that we can make. I was not planning on a talk today, and I sang a little bit too much last night. These impairments are then split up into 4 different areas. Hearing, where hearing impairments have impaired, limited or no hearing in one or both ears. Vision, where you may have impaired, limited or no vision, and this could include things like colour blindness or glaucoma or cataracts. Mobility impairments, where you have impaired, limited or no movement or control of movement, which could include conditions like arthritis or Parkinson's, which affect fine motor control. I swear I tried to cover it. Lastly, we have cognitive impairments, which includes anything that impacts how information is processed and includes a wide range of conditions such as dyslexia, ADHD, autism, limited language proficiency, migraines, epilepsy, and more. So again, who benefits from accessibility? Taking into account permanent, temporary, and situational impairments, considering impairments that impact hearing, vision, mobility, and cognition, who are we helping by making things accessible, and who are we excluding by not? Everyone. When we make things accessible, everyone benefits. Every single one of us has at some point or will at some point benefit from an accessibility improvement. I mean, think about the last time you avoided taking the stairs and used a lift or a ramp. Think about the last time you watched a video with captions. These are examples of accessibility improvements. There are a few more examples I want you to have a think about. If you've ever had a broken arm or hand, ever had an ear infection or had blocked or popped ears after a flight, if you've ever had a migraine, or if you have English as a second language, or I understand English literally is a second language in Norway, so if you have your primary language as a secondary language. If you have dyslexia, dyscalculia, or dyspraxia. If you've ever been in a loud environment, like the after party last night. If you've ever tried to use a device outside in the sun or with glare on the screen. If you've ever worn glasses, if anybody tells me they don't know anyone who's worn glasses, just look around the room. If you have a type of colour blindness, if you have ADHD or autism or epilepsy, if you've ever used an old browser or an old device, if you've ever used reader mode or viewed stuff on a small screen, if you've ever used slow internet. In Australia, we have one internet, we take it in turns, we share, and every now and then someone cuts the cable and we all lose it. If you've ever tried to use a device while holding a small child or a pet, or while multitasking. If you've ever used a virtual assistant or an AI chatbot, if you've ever had carpal tunnel or wanted to watch a video in a public place, had no headphones, if you've ever got big fingers and tried to use a small screen, or just had regular size fingers and the buttons really, really tiny and close together. If you've ever used night shift mode on the screen, if you've ever had limited fine motor control, if you've ever been easily distracted or had difficulty concentrating. These are all situations which can benefit from accessibility improvements, whether it be captions or clear language, clear non-complex language, or clear design, or thoughtful, intuitive interface layout. One or many small touches that we make can make billions of people's lives better and easier. And more importantly, it can make them feel like they're actually being thought of and like we're including them in the society and the technologies that we're building. But why is this my responsibility? Why is this your responsibility? Why is it our responsibility to do this? No matter where you sit in a company, where you are in the project or the product life cycle, we can all play a part in ensuring that what technology we're building is accessible. Now, we have a few examples that we're going to go through today. So this could be people in company leadership, people who are managers or team leaders. Maybe you've been on a recruitment team, worked for human resources, project managers, product owners, marketing and content writers, designers, developers, QA and testers, DevOps, and security. I know this may not be everyone in the room. If you feel you don't fit into one of these roles, I would love it if you came and found me afterwards, and I'd love to chat about how you can help out too. So let's take a look at some of the ways that we can help. Starting at the top, company leadership can ensure that accessibility forms a part of our core goals, policies, and values. It is much easier to do things when they're being thought about from the very beginning. Anybody who's involved in hiring decisions can make sure that accessibility skills are being prioritized or looked for when hiring new team members. This includes hiring experts in accessibility or just people who have an interest and want to learn. I would also recommend having a look at what skills assessments that you're running. If you're hiring somebody as an accessibility expert to work in the front end as a specialist, do they really need to answer questions about computer science and algorithms? Just have a think about it. As well as hiring new people, we can make sure that the existing team members have the skills as well, which includes organising and prioritising accessibility training so everyone understands their responsibilities. This could be something as simple as encouraging them to watch this talk afterwards. It's being recorded this. Last time I gave this, I told everyone to give the recording to their co-workers and then found out that the talk wasn't recorded. But it is this time. You can get them to watch it. We talked about regulations and legislation around accessibility. It's important that company leadership understands what those are and how they can impact the company. As it changes, they need to be aware of what applies to them and what they need to do to ensure that they're being compliant. Ideally, staying ahead of the curve to make it easier for the teams implementing it. I know that we would all love if our company leadership knew what was happening and gave us 6 months' notice instead of 6 days. So keep up to date with what's going to happen, not just what has happened. We talked about the advantages of an inclusive workplace. It's important to make sure that our policies and procedures reflect this from the very beginning when hiring new team members all the way through. So much of building accessible products comes from having teams with a diverse range of views and experiences. And when the workplace is inclusive, it is much easier to build and maintain that. Sorry about this. Discussing accessibility first makes things much easier. Too many projects don't have the discussion early on, and it's harder for us to make changes down the track. When accessibility is talked about from the beginning of a project or included on the roadmap, it's easier to make it happen the entire way through. It's also important to make sure that accessibility is included in the definition of done, so that when the project goes over or runs late, which absolutely never happens, but if it did happen, if it's included in the definition of done, we can ensure that it is not forgotten about. As well as including accessibility as part of the scope, it's important to make sure that a plan for testing exists in the scope. Where possible, this should include accessibility user testing by people with lived experience. For example, screen reader testing by screen reader users. This is a really important one, my favourite slide in the whole deck. Avail oneself of unostentatious vernacular. Anybody know what this means? Use simple language. Unless absolutely necessary, don't overcomplicate it. Ensure that content is written at a level that can be easily understood regardless of education level or language proficiency. Wherever information is being conveyed through images, videos, audio, or other non-text formats, ensure that there is a text alternative being provided in the form of a transcript, caption, description, or similar. And most importantly, make sure that the text alternative can be accessed and consumed by assistive technologies such as screen readers. If you have a transcript and hide it from screen readers, there's kind of no point in having a transcript. I wish I didn't have to say that, but sadly I do. Colour contrast looks at the difference between a foreground and a background colour, most often a background colour and our text colour. Make sure that there is enough contrast between the text and background colours so that it can be read by everyone. This is especially important when text is over the top of a background image or a video, as it can be difficult to read. Now, even if people haven't heard the term colour contrast before, this is often a concept we've experienced. Anyone tried to read yellow text on a white background? Or light grey text on a white background? Or someone showed me an example in my workshop which was light grey text on a mid-grey background, and it was just horrendous. Colour contrast, very easy to do well, big difference. Font size, make sure the text on your page is a decent size. No hiding teeny tiny writing. And most of the time, you'll be wanting a base font size of at least 16 pixels. If your primary user base are people with vision impairments, like a project I'm working on at the moment, probably want the base font size to be a little bit bigger. Make sure that there are clear hover and focus states for any clickable or interactive elements. This is important to make sure that we have design and development involved, because designers help to keep it in line with everything else, help to keep it on brand, but developers can then make sure it is implemented correctly. This includes making sure that you're not just relying on a subtle color change, which could be missed. You can make it noticeable and obvious while still keeping on brand. A lot of people like very subtle focus states on what they build. I like big, bold, dotted, bright yellow stands out against focus states. There is no question about whether or not that is focused. Ensure that there is clear and understandable errors so that people know what's happening, what's gone wrong, and how they can fix it. This means making it obvious so that people with vision impairments can easily find the error is recognised and announced by screen readers or assistive technologies. Not even people with vision impairments. This includes things like when I try and book a hire car and I can't submit the form because the coupon code isn't filled in, and I have an issue with this because there is no coupon code field on the form for me. Making sure that we have clear error messaging that lets us know how we can fix it. Animations, motion, and auto-playing videos can be an issue for a number of different reasons. It can distract or switch focus from the content. It can trigger motion sickness in severe cases and can trigger seizures in people with severe epilepsy. This doesn't mean that you can't use animations, but it's important to make sure that they're not in your face and distracting. There are also ways that developers can check for people's preferences and disable animations if they've opted out. One of the best things that developers can do is to ensure correct semantic HTML elements are being used when building out the structure of the content. No, not everything needs to be a div. Not everything should be a div. Sometimes you will need divs, not always the case. This includes semantic elements when used include additional functionality, context, and information out of the box. They're compatible everywhere and easy for assistive technologies to understand and consume. So this one's an easy win. Not everybody uses a mouse to navigate around. A lot of people find it easier to use a keyboard. So test and ensure that you are building stuff that is navigatable by a keyboard or another type of input device. People with vision impairments may not be able to see where the cursor is on a page. A keyboard allows them to navigate around functional elements. And people with mobility impairments often don't have fine motor control needed to control a mouse or a cursor, so a keyboard's easier for them. Accessibility has options for both manual and automated testing. Manual testing includes things like checking keyboard navigation and screen reader compatibility. Automated testing can capture things like color contrast, HTML validation, and text alternatives. It's good to make sure that we have a combination of manual and automated tests to make sure that we're catching everything. Once we've written the automated tests, we can include them as part of an automated pipeline or process so that they run along with the rest of the testing suite. Because we all know if we have to manually run a test, we're probably not going to run it. But if it's automated, we'll run every time. Although it's useful for people who are building the product to ensure that it's been fully tested, there are some things best done by people with lived experience. So where possible, have people with impairments test what it is that you're building, whether that's by hiring an external company or a consultant, or ensure that you have people on your team. Getting into the security space. When developing security policies, make sure that you're remembering the people who are involved. When procedures are convoluted or unclear, it can make it easier for your users to be susceptible to social engineering. This is particularly prevalent in people with cognitive impairments because they may miss some signs on whether or not something is a scam. Autofill functionality and password managers. This is another thing that really annoys me when people turn it off. I'm yet to have somebody tell me a legitimate reason for why autofill on password managers is being disabled. So please come and tell me if you have one. When these features are disabled, it makes it more likely that someone will accidentally enter confidential information to an insecure field. For example, putting credit card details into a notes field. These tools are particularly useful for people with impairments. And when we disable the native functionality, people often resort to third-party solutions to help them, which introduces additional risks of their data being compromised. Lastly, multi-factor authentication. When we use multi-factor authentication, consider your user's capabilities. Some people may struggle to access and enter the code before it times out. I've seen some codes that time out within 30 seconds. I can't enter a code within 30 seconds. When receiving an SMS code, some screen readers don't recognize or announce the difference between upper and lowercase letters. So if you are using these characters in your multi-factor codes, consider whether or not it needs to be case sensitive, as some people may not be able to tell. We've talked about some of the ways that we can help, but why? Like, other than the making a difference, we all like some hard data so we can take back and we can go, this is why, because these numbers, this profit, this difference. We have some hard data. A study done by Microsoft and Forrester looked at users with impairments who abandon online purchases due to accessibility issues. And it looked at an average European country with a website that gets 1 million site visits per day. If they made their website accessible, they could increase their annual revenue by 2.3 million euros. That's 1 million site visits a day. If your site is getting more, then calculations assume that you could get even more annual revenue, 2.3 million euros every year, just by making it accessible. That's just Europe. Earlier, we looked at the 15% of the global population that has a permanent impairment. There's 1.2 billion people all over the world. These people can make a big difference to your bottom line if they're able to use your product or service and interact with you as a company. Forbes has estimated that these people, these 1.2 billion people, combined with their close friends and family, who typically won't support a company that excludes their loved ones, these people are responsible for $13 trillion of disposable income each year. That's $13 trillion up for grabs for companies who make their products accessible for anybody. Each year, a not-for-profit organisation called WebAIM, Web Accessibility in Mind, do a study on the top 1 million homepages on the web. So that's not websites, that's just the homepage, the top 1 million homepages. In 2023, so last year, from those 1 million web pages, they found 49,991,225 accessibility issues. That's an average of almost 50 errors per site just on the homepage. Of those 1 million websites, 96.3% failed to meet accessibility guidelines. That means that more than 96% of these websites were built without considering the billions of people who need accessibility features to use them. This audit was also done using automated testing and unable to test all of the criteria. So chances are the number of inaccessible websites is much higher. So let's have a look at what we can do with this data. A few little steps, some takeaways that we can have from this talk. To help ensure websites and apps are accessible, the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, has developed a set of guidelines the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which you may have heard referred to as WCAG, because clearly that's how you say that word. These guidelines are developed by industry professionals, some staff, some community members, all developed publicly and openly. The most current version of the guidelines is WCAG 2.2, which was published in October. Each time the version updates, it takes into account new technologies. For example, 2.1 introduced guidelines around animations and motion. 2.2 introduced guidelines around drag and drop interfaces and authentication. Version 3 is being worked on at the moment. It is due to release some point between 2017 and I think 2030 probably. It's very nearly done. It's been almost done for a while now. It's like a government project. Version 3 is due to incorporate additional guidelines around mobile devices and more improvements for cognitive impairments. These guidelines have 3 levels of conformance: A, AA, and AAA. Level A is basic accessibility. If you are not meeting this level, people with impairments will have serious issues or be completely incapable of using your website or app. AA goes a step further and ensures that people with impairments can use it, although it may not necessarily be convenient. If you're working towards an accessibility standard, AA is typically what we will be going for. Finally, AAA is the highest level. This is typically met by organisations whose primary users are people with impairments. Whatever role you're in, it's worth knowing a little bit about these guidelines. At the very least, you exist, which if you didn't, you do now. Congrats. What level you need to meet and how you can test against them. WCAG 2.2 came out in October, and there are a bunch of really great explainers that go through the guidelines and what the changes are, so I recommend checking that one out. This is why I travel with throat lozenges. A little change can make a huge difference. If you're using a component library as well, there's a decent chance that one tiny fix can resolve hundreds or thousands of issues. A little really does go a long way. Let's have a look at the data from the WebAIM Million homepage audit. 49,991,225 accessibility issues. Of those, 96.1% are easy, quick fixes. That's over 48 million issues that could be fixed with a small code change. These issues were from insufficient color contrast, missing alternative text on images, buttons and links that had no label or were completely empty, missing labels on form inputs, and missing document language. Now, I'm not talking like the language of the text, like English, Norwegian, Spanish, French. I'm talking about the doc type. This is the first line of a HTML. First line of a HTML file, and such an easy fix. 1 in 5 websites tested were missing this. 1 in 5 websites on the internet that were tested were missing the first line. The first line. Color contrast was more than 60% of those issues. More than 60% of the issues were insufficient color contrast. WCAG guidelines have a minimum ratio of 4.5 to 1 to meet AA standard and 7 to 1 to meet AAA standard. And to help determine the color contrast, there's a bunch of really great tools there. I really like this one called Who Can Use, which not only calculates the difference between two colors, but simulates several different vision impairments and compares those as well. For example, combination of red and green may technically pass AA standard with a ratio of 4.5 to 1, but if people have a type of color blindness that affects how they view red or green, it may fail. There are also plenty of tools out there that compare brand colors against one another. This is really useful to know which colors can be used together and which pass color contrast guidelines. Having a text alternative for your images. People who can't see the image may miss it. And screen readers or assistive technologies can't describe it to them. And yes, I know we have AI now, but it doesn't do as good a job. We say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but that means that people who can't see the picture are missing a lot of information. If we don't have a text alternative, like this case, the screen reader will read out the file name, my_dog.jpg. Something like this, it's not too bad. You would probably assume it is a picture of my dog. It doesn't give you too much information. Most of the time, we don't have nice descriptive file names. We have auto-generated file names, generally multi-directories deep, which are not remotely helpful and a poor user experience, especially because a screen reader can't pronounce that word, so it will read every single character. Instead, we can add an alt attribute to the image, giving the user information about it if they can't see it. This doesn't necessarily mean describing the entire image, but describing the important parts of the image, the intent behind why it is included on the page. If an image isn't conveying any information, if it's purely for presentational purposes, or if it's a stock image, it's probably not important. We can instead use an empty alt attribute, which lets assistive technologies know that it's not important and they can ignore it altogether. As well as text descriptions for images, we need to make sure that our other media has text alternatives as well. Videos and audio recordings can be given captions and transcripts. These are beneficial for other people rather than just those with hearing impairments. I much prefer watching videos with captions. They help me to follow what's going on. Really, really bugs my partner because he's a video editor, and when I get really big captions over the bottom of his very nice movie on the very nice large 4K TV, apparently it ruins the experience. I also really like that if I don't have headphones, I can watch a video with captions when I'm on public transport or if I'm at a conference and there's a talk that's really boring. If the social media video doesn't have captions on it, I'm not watching it. I'm not going to turn the sound on because there's like obnoxious music in the background. So if it doesn't have captions, it's not happening. I'm skipping it. If you're relying on graphs and charts, make sure that there's a text description for them as well, so people who can't see them can still understand the information. If you have a picture of a chart in your content, alt text of bar chart, not really useful. Unless you're just talking about an example bar chart is not a description for an actual chart. What does the data say? What is it conveying? We can use attributes like aria described by, which allow us to link a description with a visual element like an image. This description doesn't need to be visually hidden either. It may be a paragraph of content that already exists elsewhere on the page explaining the content in the image. Make sure that your form inputs have labels associated with them. Even if the design doesn't display them, you can hide the labels visually and keep them linked so that screen readers know what each input is. We can link labels using the for and ID attributes. The ID attribute is separate from the name and can be randomly generated to ensure that it's unique. The placeholder attribute, while it does display in the field, is not announced by or even recognized by screen readers. If you've got an existing pipeline for automating tests, have a look at integrating some accessibility testing in there. Start running some validations and check to make sure that you're not introducing new issues with the code that you write. If you don't have a testing pipeline, I have a blog post to help you get started on a GitHub Actions testing pipeline, and I will share afterwards my talk from London this year on how to do it. Or there's quite a few people from GitHub around. Go and find them and bug them about how to do it. You can tell them I sent you. It helps to understand what people experience when they use screen readers. There are free and paid options available, plus built-in functionality to Windows, macOS, Android, and iOS. So when you get back to your desk, when you next open up your device, try opening up the screen reader. Navigate around a web page, see what you can find, what you can do, see what it tells you about what you can see on the page. If you feel up to it, try closing your eyes and see if you can work things out without seeing the screen. Now this is where we see if the sound works.
Level 4. DDD Brisbane is a non-profit community event. DDD Brisbane is currently link sponsorship@brisbane.com, link info@brisbane.com, link view the agenda.
So this is a demo from last time I gave a talk because I didn't have a chance to do a test on the NDC website. This is the kind of experience we have using a screen reader. This is a very useful step to do, and I highly recommend us all to try using a screen reader at least once. But it's not the same as people who use screen readers every day. So if you haven't experienced someone using a screen reader, we'll see if this one works as well.
You notice that JAWS repeats to me each character as I type it. That way if I make a mistake, I can hear it and I can backspace. And I can retype it again. Now press enter.
SLCC-Mozilla Firefox page has 3 regions, 8 settings, and 68 links. SLCC.
Oh, it says SLCC. It sounds like...
What's the first thing you notice? It is super fast. People who use screen readers on a daily basis use them to scan the page the same way a visual user does with their eyes. So get in the practice of using a screen reader, but I highly recommend, if the project calls for it and the budget allows it, get somebody who uses a screen reader to come in and do some testing for you. Now, I'm going to assume that all of you know how important training and personal development is, because you're at a conference or watching the video online afterwards. You've given up your time to come and learn new things and see some amazing speakers and presentations. There's plenty of options for training and upskilling around accessibility, so find one that works for you or your team in a format that works for you. Some people prefer in-person workshops, some self-paced online, and some prefer books or blog posts. Intopia is a digital agency that specializes in accessibility. They have a heap of different courses available. These courses target different roles and teams as well, including design, development, content writing, testing, project management, app development, and more. So this is a really great place to check out for some training. They both run training for teams, but do occasionally run public workshops too. Sarah Soeden has been working on an online course for a while, and it was released last year. It's targeted at developers and designers, and I haven't had a chance to do too much of it yet, but is a really amazing course. I recommend checking it out. I also have a workshop that I run in companies and covers accessibility and accessibility testing in depth for developers and designers. I also run it at NDCs. So did that earlier this week and will be again in Copenhagen. And fingers crossed, maybe next year. If you were interested in doing that, you've got 12 months to convince your boss and buy a ticket and convince the organisers to get me back again next year. I want to make a quick note as well about accessibility overlays and widgets. These are often used as a quick fix to try and make a website accessible. Not only do they not fix things and make the website accessible, in most cases, they actually make it significantly worse and override existing settings that users may already have. It can also open a site up to security concerns and potential data breaches. There's a really great fact at overlayfactsheet.com, which includes quotes of support from accessibility experts all over the world. Got a couple of resources that I've put together. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will share the links out in Slack afterwards and my slides when I've had a chance to upload them. It is available at capers.dev/a11y_resources, and I'll share that link in Slack. Accessibility, it's not a nice to have or we'll do it later or an additional feature. Accessibility makes a huge difference in the lives of billions of people. And inaccessibility excludes them from the technology that makes the rest of our lives easier. It excludes them from being a part of society and tells them that they're not welcome. And accessibility isn't just for those 1.2 billion people with permanent impairments. It helps all of us every day and makes all of our lives better. Accessibility helps us even when we don't know it or don't think about it. And most importantly, we can all play a part in making our website, our products, our technologies more accessible. We can all make a change. We can take a small step. We can learn one little thing that can make a big difference to someone who relies on accessibility just to exist in our technology-dependent world. Thank you very much for your time today. I am going to be around for the rest of the conference. If you have any questions, or otherwise I have a feedback form if you would like to give me any further feedback. And I will let you go and enjoy lunch now. Thank you very much.